we sound when we experience something that horrible. It's not a question. It's a cry. And because it's not a real question, no answer will offer comfort. They're with the Lord now. Boy, do you really want to hear that? I mean, we mean well. And the truth is that you and I would give an extremity to relieve the pain of the suffering of someone we love. But we are not able to do it. They're in a better place. Ugh. They are. But the pain of where are you, God, or why, God, is a cry, not a question. And so we do not have the ability to answer the question. In John 11, from which I just read, when Jesus was talking to Martha, He said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha's answer was, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." You could hear almost Martha saying after that, "What good does that do me now? I hurt now. I'm bereaved now. My pain is here." William Safire wrote in the New York Times in January 2005 an article called "Where Was God?" in a response to the earthquake and tsunamis in Indonesia, killing over 200,000 people. He said, the first point the book of Job made was that suffering is not evidence of sin. When Job's friends said that he must have done something awful to deserve such misery, the reader knows that is false. Job's suffering was a test of his faith, even as he grew angry with God for being unjust, wishing he could sue him in a court of law. He never abandoned his belief. There was no logical reason for Job's suffering. Job became angry. He became angry, but he knew that he had not sinned, and so he did not repent. He did say, "Where are you?" And even in his integrity, he knew that he was not sinning against God by feeling and expressing the pain that he felt. So what we learn is that victims of tragedy are not being singled out by God, nor are they being punished by God. And being angry and lashing out is not a sign of weak faith. Nancy Gibbs from Time Magazine, after Hurricane Katrina, shared a different point of view. She said, there's a response. There's the response of those convinced they know God's politics and are just as intent on seeing the guilty assigned. An ultra-conservative Israeli rabbi declared that Katrina was retribution for U.S. support of the Israeli pullout from Gaza. Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam called Katrina judgment for the Iraq War. The Christian Civic Group of Maine noted that the hurricane struck just as New Orleans was planning a huge gay rights festival. A Kuwaiti official said that the terrorist Katrina is one of the soldiers of Allah. Nancy Gibbs goes on to say, there was, in other words, broad agreement in some far-reaching quarters that Katrina represented God's judgment, there was just no consensus of what the sin was. So the questions that it leaves us with is, does God kill the guilty? Does God spare the guilty? Does God make things happen? Does God allow things to happen? Billy Graham said, in following up to the Time article, he said, perhaps the worst tragedy, referring to Hurricane Katrina, that has ever been known since the Civil War, but the greatest opportunity to demonstrate God's love in this generation. It is possible that, let me offer perhaps a Christian perspective when the question of why goes from grief to a form of permanent cynicism, which tragically can happen. The question of why, God, or where are you, God, may ignore some of the unanswered questions that God has asked. In Genesis, where are you? Spoken then to Adam and Eve and spoken to us all down through the eons. In Mark chapter 8, who do you say that I am? That's a question that God asks of everyone. James 4, what is your life? Matthew 16, what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his soul? Jonah chapter 4, do you have a reason to be angry? When we are drawn into cynicism about why it is that we think God has not been there, it makes the assumption that this life is all that there is, and because of what happened, all is lost. When we are in blinding grief, that is more than just a feeling. It's a wound that guts your soul. But over time, if it becomes an attitude of our heart, a cynical approach to God, that all is lost, then we have lost touch with the basic tenets of what we believe. It also assumes that we are on the same level with God. In Job chapter 38, God said, another question, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? In other words, and maybe I think God maybe was too polite to say this, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? In other words, what really do you know about it all? I mean, really. We can't see all that there is. Our perspective, even for the most spiritual of people, is so narrowly limited. Many of us are stuck on me and mine. Some of us are able to reach beyond that to a neighbor or to humanity or to the world. But rarely do we have the spiritual depth to be able to imagine beyond all of that. And since so much of that is impossible for us, what then is our response? And by the way, I want to say, I don't want to leave the impression for a moment that when someone is hurting like that, there's not anything that you can do. But usually talking is not one of them. Usually the best thing to do is just be there and shut up. Just be there. Now, that's hard because we're wired this way. It's like when silence goes on, somebody's got to say something. But the truth is that that's not it. Just being present, holding a hand, or just sitting in the other chair, getting a glass of water, washing the dishes. That's because, look, I've been to school, and I know that there's nothing that I can say that is so powerful and learned as to wage that kind of grief. Presence, look, or at least it'll speak to it. But not much else. Not in that moment. I remember my dad. He was at the hospital when my mother died, and my Uncle Charles came up to him, and I think people go to school for stupid sometimes. He slapped him on the back and he said, "Well, now it's time for you to be 10 feet tall." That didn't do Dad a lot of good. So, presence, silence. But for us, for the one who is suffering, for the one who has experienced this unimaginable blow to their lives, when we can think again, when we can breathe again, then hopefully we can either remember or be reminded what Jesus said, "Draw near to me, and I will draw near to you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Let not your heart be troubled." So I didn't address the question, or at least I didn't answer the question of where is God in all of this. And I didn't answer the question of why do these things happen. And I think that the truth is that you either have to take a view that there is no God and we're all just in it, individually, or the view that I take is I'm not capable of sorting it out. I can't understand it, but I do know that God does. And there will be a time when I will understand it too. It's just not now. And in the meantime, I have a choice to draw near or walk away. I don't advocate walking away. Give God the full measure of your emotions, whatever they may be. Vent. People get hurt feelings sometimes as you vent with them, but not with God. Can't hurt God's feelings. He knows what you feel. Believing can go on when there is no understanding. And I think most importantly, we are never alone. God is here. That's where He is. together and built the wall.
In keeping with our pastor's changing sermon, we're going to change our last song as well. And we're going to stand and sing together 575, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. You'll have to use the hymnal unless you know it by heart. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms.
Now receive God's blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you. Grant you peace. Go in peace.
Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. God bless you.